Hi folks, welcome back. My name is Warbass. Today's a very exciting day for me, and that's because the A case has evolved a little bit. If you don't know what the A case is, that's what I kind of refer to the case you're looking at right now. It's my 7U 104 HP kind of ambient stereo sample mangling focused interactive instrument. This is really my primary Eurorack case, but also my primary instrument, recording device, mastering flow, and everything for when I create music. Just next to it here is my B case. I've made a couple videos on that recently as I've been trying to work on refining it. One of the first videos, I think the first video I made on this channel that I actually spoke in was about patching this case from scratch. And I created that video because I finally felt that I had a point of view that I thought I could offer that was mine, at least. Who knows how unique it might be, but it was something that I felt that I could say authentically about how I approach modular synthesis and making music, and I could offer that to the world. That video's done kind of well, or better than I expected it to, and this is kind of an update to that. I've changed quite a few things. I talk in that video quite a bit about the concept of an init patch, of like my starting point. Well, I've changed things in this case by taking out 3 modules and adding in 2. One of them is a kind of cheap one in terms of the actual add. It's just a little USB port that is powering this little gooseneck light just out of frame here to give me a little bit of extra light. Same setup is now happening in the B case as well. I've got a video about modifying the IntelliGel USB port so that it can be run on just standard old 16-pin Eurorack power instead of on their little 2-pin connector that's only on the IntelliGel bus boards. I'll put a link to that up there. The other thing that's actually the real add is this module here. This is the new stereo matrix mixer from AI Synthesis. It is something I've been kind of looking for and waiting to find in modular for quite a long time. As this case is entirely stereo, I needed a mixer if I was ever going to go into matrix mixing that was going to support that. I know Bear Modules has had a stereo matrix mixer for a while. There's something about it that just didn't really speak to me in terms of, I don't know, maybe its design or its size. It's a bit bigger than this, but I've always had my eye on AI Synthesis. I see Abe, the guy who runs it on the Modular Reddit all the time. He seems like a great dude. And when this came out, it was an easy pickup for me. And what it's done is been able to change a couple of things in my case. So primarily, I used to leverage this section of my 1U row to take a recorded stereo sample, typically into the looper. And then once the output of the looper was polished or running or whatever the output was, I would take that and pipe it into this little XY module that sat right here, which was then connected in the back to these switches. And I would leverage these switches to kind of turn on the left and right of that X and Y into 3 separate channels to route that audio into panharmonium, into beads, also directly into jumblehenge, and move it around my case as I see fit. The new plan is to not use this really for audio at all anymore, but instead take the output of the looper, or maybe the output of beads if I sample into a frozen buffer on beads, which is something I want to do more of, hence the benefit of it now living up here in this row as it used to be down here. Whatever the output is of my kind of currently grabbed sample, bring that into the matrix mixer and leverage not just these on-off switches anymore to route it around the case, but some knobs, some attenuation to then pipe that signal into, any of the 4 places. I can take that, say if it's coming out of looper, I can take that into channel 1 here and then control how much of it is going maybe into beads, maybe directly into jumblehenge, how much of it might be going into panharmonium, etc. Take those out, route them around my case, and then also if I want to, maybe route them back into the mixer and create some wonderful feedback. The other module that I gave up, two more modules that I gave up to make this possible. One of them was Axis, which I've kept. I haven't listed this to sell yet, which is kind of my policy. If I buy something and it's not going to fit in my pallet case of storage, little 62 HP kind of buffer of modules that I'm not quite ready to sell yet, then I get rid of it. This one doesn't fit in that case at the moment, but I'm still holding on to this because I think it's an extremely useful module. Two, VC controllable, DC coupled stereo crossfaders in 6 HP. It's insane how powerful this is. It's basically, two stereo VCAs, but also two wonderful crossfaders with fantastic feedback visually. And you can VC control the whole thing, or CV control the whole thing. So really cool module, but I mostly used it to do crossfades and dry wet between two audio signals, even though it's great for blending and merging CV and other things. I've got another crossfader here that I can use to blend CV in this little 2U fader from Instro, and I can leverage the stereo matrix mixer to create dry wet signal pass on things when I want to. And I really did that primarily for Guillotine, because it's really the only module here that affects sound that doesn't have a built-in dry wet, because Beats has got one, Starlab's got one, Panharmonium's got one. So I have most of the features that I used most often on this still doable with the Matrix Mixer, which is why I was okay with letting it go, or at least moving it from this case. The other module that is no longer here is Dresno, and I actually sold that. I actually sold Dresno, I think, before I bought the Matrix Mixer. I sold it to somebody locally. Benny, I hope you're enjoying it. Super kind of small world moment when we met up to do the handoff, and you said you were a subscriber of my very tiny YouTube channel, which is pretty neat. But I still really think that module's amazing. It can do a ton of really cool stuff to audio. It is an incredibly creative way to create different rhythm patterns and just mangle a signal. When I bought it, I thought I would build out the whole Leibniz system, if I'm saying that correctly. And at this point, within these two cases, there's nowhere that I can see that much HP going to that. And so if it definitely wasn't going to make sense or fit into my B case and how I work and use that case. And since I didn't see a path towards getting the entire system actually in this case, it was pretty easy that I was going to make the decision to let that one go. And also when mangling the audio on it, it is a mono path through it. And now everything here is stereo and there's no exception. So still really think Dresno is a really incredible module, but I'm not going to just hang on to it and let it collect dust when somebody else could be getting the benefit out of it. So in this video, I'm going to do a bunch of patching, recreate the Init Patch, but with the Matrix Mixer, and then play around with a handful more different, more creative things that I can do with this Matrix Mixer that I couldn't do using my old audio routing method of these switches. Now, why am I still keeping this here if I'm not using it for audio anymore? I think it's super handy to still be able to kind of toggle between CV sources and just have a mult in general. So stay tuned. I'm going to do some patching. We'll listen to some stuff and try out this new mixer that I'm pretty stoked about. All right, here is the Init Patch kind of reset for a new world of stereo matrix mixing with my A case. As always, I've got a stereo mic coming into the dual instrument interfaces. That audio is being routed directly into the looper. In this case, just being recorded in stereo linked mode. Very simple. Nothing is happening at all here to edit that raw audio. It's just looping. Instead of the audio coming out in this pair and going over to this 1U mult section to kind of be split into these stereo pairs around the case via these, pairs of multiples that I would set up, I'm having that now go into the first row of the stereo matrix mixer. And if I want to pass some of that audio to the output, in this case, I have it output directly into Jumblehenge in the first column. Now, this is not going to be a tutorial on how to use a matrix mixer. There are way better videos out there and people making tutorials than I would make or that I would want to make. But as I turn up this first knob here, we should be getting some of that dry loop straight from the looper. This knob controlling how much of the signal is going down into this pair of cables, into Jumblehenge, through Shackmat High Pass, through Libelegio, and be recorded on SD card right here. If you haven't watched my kind of half-hour patch from scratch, I don't do anything to the audio that comes off of these or the SD cards. I take it directly into Premiere, which is my video editing tool I use, drop the audio straight from the SD card into Premiere, edit the video, and ship it. So all of my mastering, mixing, and everything happens in this case, and I want it to always stay that way, because I make way more music without having to actually do anything after I'm done making the music to try and polish it, because I just don't find that very fun. Now, this first channel of the Matrix Mixer is going straight to Jumblehenge. The second channel is actually coming out and going into Beads and then into Jumblehenge. So if I turn up this second knob here, now I'm controlling how much of this signal then goes down here out this pair of cables. I can turn off the first signal, and now you're just hearing Beads do its beadsy thing. Right, not worried about what that's doing now. That the case or this patch is not trying to be necessarily enjoyable or musical in any way. I'm just trying to demonstrate the functions here. The next pair of module or pair of cables at the bottom are going over into Panharmonium, which is then in this current patch going through Optimix just to filter it a little bit and dampen it down, and then into Jumblehenge to join the final mix there. So if I turn up this knob, then we start to hear the Jumblehenge output. Which is always fun to hear, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I crank the number of oscillators up Panharmonium is using, you can basically hear the exact words I'm saying as we dial that back. 1, 2, or pitch it. What's really, really nice about the Matrix Mixer compared to my old way is that I have actually volume control going into each of my different audio paths now, instead of just sending it in and trying to use the modules, either, the dry wet on here or the input gain adjust button combo on Beads or something else to try and mix volume levels. I actually can do that just with this first row of knobs, which is really nice. Now the last pair of cables down here is coming out and going into Guillotine, and instead of Guillotine going into Jumblehenge, in which case would be just a distorted version of the original audio, I'm actually taking that signal and putting it back into the second row of the Matrix Mixer, which then lets me add, because if I turn this up you shouldn't hear anything, because again the audio is just coming right back here and all these knobs are down. But if I turn up, let's say, how much distortion is going into Panharmonium, let's add a little bit of reverb. Oh, I forgot to mention the entire mix from Jumblehenge is coming out into Starlab before going to ShackMat high pass. 2, 3. We can bring Beads back in. 2, 3, 4. Now Beads only has the dry signal. It doesn't have any of Guillotine going into it unless I turn up the second knob. Similarly, if I want just the direct audio from Guillotine to go into Jumblehenge, I can turn up this knob. 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. We can then also feedback from Guillotine back into Guillotine. 2, 3. In this case, I guess kind of overloading it a little much, but that's okay. We can take all the distortion out of each individual part by just turning down the knobs in that second row. And now we're still sending the signal into Guillotine, but it's not coming back out and going anywhere with the final mix. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. I'm just delighted. This is going to offer me so much more flexibility in terms of routing. This is just one version of, the potential routing options that the Matrix Mixer offers, that it really is just trying to replicate a very simple routing that I had that didn't have versions. I was kind of stuck with one method of moving things around with this system over here. Already I have, with using one kind of quarter of the module, not only replicated what I've done over here, but I've also added, volume control on it. And starting to use the next setup, I now have also solved for what I used to use Axis for in terms of dry wetting this guillotine, but I've done that 4 times over, being able to dry wet it across each of the other signal paths and insert guillotine wherever I want in my signal flow, which is just fantastic. If you haven't watched the rest of that, Patch from Scratch video, I talk a little bit more about how I used pressure points and how I like to set up CV, because I've done, as you might have noticed, no CV patching at all right here. I'm just talking about audio really so far. The Matrix Mixer over here is DC coupled, so I can pass CV through that and use it entirely as a CV mixer, or use the first 2 columns and as an inputs as a audio Matrix Mixer, and the other kind of quadrant as CV, and that would work just fine too, I think. I think I'm going to try and set up a couple very, very different patches with some less boring audio examples, and just play a couple of those without necessarily a ton of explanation. We'll see. But yeah, this is the new direction of the A case. Kind of a big deal for something to make a change here. It takes a lot of personal convincing that something is going to be worth it for me to edit this case. And I think that this is going to really, really change how I use this to make music. And I'm delighted that it arrived today. And thank you for staying tuned, as this was literally the first time I've patched it up at all. And it's been exciting and giving me a lot of hope for the direction of this case, and confidence that I made the right decision going away from this, selling Dresno, and moving away from Axis, even though I love both of those modules so much. So thank you for listening. Probably here's some patches to play this out, but until next time, peace.